Hi folks, welcome to Chapter 15, Digital Media and the Online World. So considering this is an online class, it's a pretty appropriate chapter to do, which is why we'll cover it now before we tackle some of the other stuff. So I want to do a brain refresh about Chapter 14. So remember the brain refresh are just to see what you remember, and even if you don't remember it, make sure it's in your notes, and so that way you know that you're getting at least most of the big things you should out of the previous chapters. So, can you name the 4 theories about mass media discussed in Chapter 14? Explain the difference between cultivation theory and agenda setting theory. Tell me how are agenda setting theory and framing different? What is uses and gratification theory? And tell me, what does it mean to be a critical consumer and why does it matter? So for Chapter 15 about digital communication, the focus questions from Wood are: what are digital media? In what ways do digital media change how we think? Can you be a critical, reflective user of digital technology? How can you be a critical, reflective user? And what are the democratic and non-democratic potentials of digital media? So before we move on, I want you to take a moment and for your own information, when you wake up in the morning, from the time you get up till the time you go to bed, pick a full day, record your usage of digital technologies for the entire day. So how long did you spend on email, texting, Tinder, Twitter, Facebook, Yik Yak, whatever other social networking sites, Instagram, right, whatever that you want to use. So it's up to you how you want to record it, but in general, how long are you spending on these various digital technologies for an entire day? And generally just an average day of your week. So tomorrow when you get up again, tally the total amount of time spent on the digital technologies. And I'm curious, are you surprised by the answer? Are you surprised by the number of hours we now spend per day on each of these? So what are digital media? Wood defines them as electronic modes of communication that store and manage data in digital form. These are communication channels in which your messages are not transmitted directly from you to another person. Instead, they go through computer technology that digitizes, stores, and sends them. So this is a pretty important piece because we use this very consistently now. So some important features of digital media, and Wood goes into more depth about all of these. Digital media can be manipulated. It features convergence and speed. So Photoshop is a great example of manipulation, but we see this in a lot of other different ways. Convergence, she gives the example of Skype, where we're able to bring together the video and the phone, and that was a big deal when that happened. And speed, we now expect things very, very quickly compared to how it used to happen. Some other terms to know moving forward. CMC is computer-mediated communication, and F2F you'll see occasionally, and that means face-to-face. And so that's kind of in person, you're hanging out with a friend, right? There's no mediating technology in between you. So there are 2 major controversies talked about in the chapter about how digital media affects us and how it shapes our lives. One of this is who benefits from digital media, right? And a lot of folks benefit. We get a lot of very positive things from digital media, and the list is so extensive that I'll leave you to kind of parse some of those out. But even, for example, that you can take this class from anywhere or at any time, that I can teach it from anywhere or any time, that we can send money and microloans to developing nations and individuals there, right? But we also have to remember that there's a very distinct digital divide. So those folks who have access compared to those who don't are very much the haves and have-nots, right? And that divide is widening. And it very much affects people's possibilities in the future. And some people are actively harmed by digital media. So think cyberbullying, stalking, identity theft, right? So when we talk about who benefits from digital media, we have to remember the flip side of that. And the other big controversy that Wood covers is how does it affect thinking? Studies show that it very much encourages multitasking, but the downside of this is it hinders productivity, it makes it difficult for people to focus on a single activity, and difficult to switch between tasks. Using digital technology very much encourages our response to visual stimuli, but funnily enough, it's also changing our reading. It's changing our brains. So digital reading is we watch vertically as a screen scrolls by, and that's a different brain and neurological process than in paper reading, which is this horizontal and just kind of a very different processing. And also the way it might affect our thinking is that we want it to, but the internet and digital technology really might not facilitate independent critical thinking. If we think back to the mass media chapter about heavy users and we consider how much we're on the internet, it's not television, but it's very likely we have some similar effects, and think about that mainstreaming effect. So some of the information here about multitasking and that digital reading piece and how our brains are being affected, I've put up as additional resources. There's quite a lot of additional resources listed for this chapter. Some pretty interesting things going on, and it's a very developing field, so definitely take some time to look through those. So Wood also wants to talk about the democratic or non-democratic potential of digital media. So what does this mean? And the key here is to remember that democratic, the word, comes from the Greek word demos and means the people. So when we talk about being something democratic, we're concerned with equality for the public, for the people. So for instance, social media, and very in particular Twitter, have facilitated literally revolutions and protests on behalf of social justice. So if you have not heard of the Arab Spring in 2012, you should look it up. It's going to be all over Google. It was a series of revolutions in the Middle East, and we're still actually have effects of those. Syria is still in conflict because of this. But they were very censored in a lot of nations and used Twitter and Facebook to organize and to literally have revolutions. And I've given you some examples of other Twitter hashtags that are being used for public good and to try and increase democratic potential. However, I also mentioned the digital divide. Right? So when we talk about non-democratic, the digital divide is widening the gap of access. So the digital divide, who has access, who doesn't? Who has the knowledge of how to use this? Who has the skill of how to use this? And this is the internet, computers, right? Smartphones, any types of technology. And so the better you are with it, the more possibilities you have moving forward. But there's a lot of nations and a lot of individuals who don't have the privilege of accessing the internet, don't have the privilege of owning or accessing computers, and those are folks who the gap is widening for them about whether or not they're able to reach a level of success that we deem even sustainable, right, for life and for housing. And it's also to remember very non-democratic potentials, as I mentioned, are cyberbullying, hacking, cyberstalking, and censorship. These all act against the public good. Censorship is a really big problem in a lot of places. There are entire nations. So for instance, China does not use Google. That's not true. They don't use Facebook. And I don't believe they use Twitter because the government censors them. And the Google version that they use is very different than the version of Google that you use because a lot of sites will not come up. And so censorship does not only happen in China, but it's a very extreme example of how we see that happening on the internet. So those are all very non-democratic potentials, even though social media has sparked some literally democratic change in overthrowing some dictators. So the biggest thing that I want to talk to you about is interacting online and what is your online persona. So think about what identity do you present online, right? So social networking sites, remember that the world can see information about you through your posts and through your pictures and through your friends' posts and pictures. Increasingly, employers are friending employees, and there are repercussions if you have actions that are not representative of the organization's identity. For instance, in 2013, the state of Kansas Their university regents passed a rule that faculty could be fired for improper posts or tweets that the regents felt did not support the mission of the university. And in 2014, Oregon became one of only 11 states to ban employers from requiring employees to provide their Facebook passwords. And this is a problem because many of us put things online that we might perhaps not want to follow us everywhere. And it's important to remember that things on the internet do not go away. So what persona are you presenting online? Right? These are all some examples of Facebook images gone wrong. And for instance, this gentleman in the middle posted about driving drunk and hitting a car, and the police actually arrested him based on his Facebook post and were able to identify him. But then we also have more entertaining pieces that say, because of the world we live in now, those little moments which might not be the best publicly revealed, they don't go away, and they are spread everywhere. So as you think about competent digital communication, what do you need to know to effectively and appropriately communicate with others through digital forms? How can you be a critical, reflective user of digital technology? So in your notes, take a moment and answer these questions based on what you know about being a competent communicator, which we talked about in the lecture for Chapter 1. And specifically the lecture, it's not in the book itself. And also think about being a critical consumer of mass media. So if we're talking about this competent digital communication, do you need to add anything to the list to account for digital forms of interacting? Also in your notes, on the next slide, I have a chart for you to recreate and to fill in. And the goal here is to pretend that you need to train someone how to use various digital technologies effectively and appropriately. So for this whole list of digital technologies, when do you appropriately use it? And how do you appropriately use it? So what are the rules for do's and do nots? And think about both explicit and implicit rules, right? What are the social expectations, right? These are very context-specific answers, just with most communication questions. And so choose a context to focus on. Workplace is a great one. School works really well. Family and relationships can also work. So as you think about the explicit and implicit rules of interaction, also think about why are these the rules? Why are these our expectations? And what does it present to others that we follow them or not? So I've given you an example in this chart for the social rules of competent digital communication. And I've written up email. The reason I included email is because I've already talked with you about it through the email communication assignment. So for instance, in email, some appropriate context to use it, professional context, family, classmates, maybe romantic relationships, right? Long distance relationships particularly. So think about what are some of the do's, both explicit and implicit. So when you're talking in professional settings or to older generations, you think of it as a letter. Definitely using spell check, checking who you're sending to instead of hitting reply all. But then some big don'ts is you avoid text speaks. You don't email personal sensitive topics on work systems because anything you send on a work system becomes the property of the company. And don't use email for complex conversations, better done face-to-face. And we could keep listing rules for the do's and especially the do-nots, right? We've all had that grandparent or great-great-uncle who's, been on Facebook or been on email, and you look at what they've put up and you're like, oh no. And whenever you have that moment that you're embarrassed for what they've done or frustrated by what they've done, what's happening there is they've broken a social expectation. They've broken one of these explicit or implicit rules. And that's that discomfort that you have. And so take a look at those moments and look at, okay, what rules are being broken here and why is that rule in place?